Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Holtain. I'm the Executive Director of the Victorian Law Foundation, and welcome to this Better Information session, one of our continuing series to help you communicate better with the very diverse audiences that you encounter. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to have with us Rosalyn Gladwin to present on webinars, which is brilliantly timed, given that we're in our lead up to Law Week. And of course, many of you will be preparing materials for Law Week presentations. But even if you're not, even if you're just giving webinars anytime, any place, then further insights into how to make them engaging and how to connect with your audience is incredibly valuable for all of us. And reminders are always useful. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but let me open by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, wherever you may be joining us today from across Victoria. In my case, that's Bunwurrung country, and I pay my respects to their elders and to all the generations of Bunwurrung who have cared for this land and these waterways for millennia. And to all First Nations peoples, and especially those who may be on the call with us today, acknowledging, of course, that these lands were never ceded. At the Foundation, we recognise the impact of colonisation, its legacy of injustice and marginalisation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and we believe that acknowledging the past is an essential step in building a better and more equitable future. Just a few housekeeping matters before I pass the baton to Rosalyn. Just a reminder that as a webinar, your cameras and microphones are all turned off, so the only people visible and audible will be the presenters today. The chat function we reserve for technical issues, so if you're having technical problems for whatever reason and you think it might be possible that we can fix it at our end, please use the chat function. But if you're looking to make comments or to ask questions, Q&A is the destination for you. So please go there and put your questions and upvote other questions that you would like to hear the answers to as well, because we will have time at the end of the presentation to get to those with Rosalyn, and very much look forward to that conversation. And just to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, so we will send you all a link to the recording after the fact. It will be transcribed and captioned so that it's fully accessible. We'll send you the link, and we'll also send you the link to any other resources relevant from today's conversation. So with all that in mind, let me introduce you to Rosalyn Gladwin. She is the founder and principal of Gladwin Legal, which is a boutique firm specialising in legal services for retailers and businesses. And Rosalyn established Gladwin Legal after working in retail with Myer for about 6 years, as well as across a number of Australian and international top-tier firms. Now, we spotted Rosalyn as a presenter in last year's Law Week. And if you're preparing for this year's and for any other purpose to give a webinar, we thought there was nothing better than hearing from the front line, so to speak, and somebody who's done it before and who does it very effectively and regularly. So with all that in mind, and a reminder also that we'll have questions at the end, let me pass the baton now to Rosalyn. We look forward very much to hearing from you. Thanks.
Hi, and welcome everyone. Thanks, Lynn, for that lovely introduction. And I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of our land, and think that what you said, Lynn, was completely on point and echo those sentiments. So I'll start my presentation. I'll just do a share screen. If anyone has any issues, if they can't see it, just give me a yell. So welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about how to connect with your audience and give the best presentation of your life in Law Week. I can't really explain why 200 or so people would be coming, other than maybe we need some extra CPD points at the start of the year, but welcome, and we'll get into it. So connecting with your audience, today we're going to talk about how to connect with your audience, who is your audience, the power of PowerPoint and how you can best use it to maximize your presentation, and some various tech tips and tricks and some pitfalls that we have seen. So just a little funny quote about imagining everyone in Spanx should give you a little bit of a giggle, a little bit different when we're on Zoom. So it's really important to understand who is your audience. Think about who they are. Are they lawyers? Are they non-lawyers? Are they business people? And make sure that your presentation is pitched at the correct level. If you're pitching to lawyers, obviously it's going to be completely different jargon. We all know in the legal sphere how much we love acronyms and Latin, and a lot of people who haven't had 5 or 6 years at law school and don't spend their day reading cases aren't going to understand a lot of that jargon. So make sure once you've prepared your presentation that you've had a look back through it, maybe even record yourself and then watch it and listen to it as a lay person, a business person, or a person who is in your audience, and consider whether they would actually understand what it is you're talking about. Use plain language. I know that's something that's, you know, a real bugbear of mine. When you go to a presentation and it is very technical or it's overly convoluted, certainly when I'm reading agreements or, you know, drafting something, it's really important just to sit back again and have a look at what you've written or what you've drafted or what you're going to say, and make sure that it's, you know, simple, inviting, and understandable. Then ask for questions through the presentation rather than leaving it all to the end, because if you leave it all to the end, people tend to sit there and think about, you know, what is their question? They've got it in their mind, they, you know, want to ask it, and they're not necessarily listening to the presentation at the time. Keep it really practical. This is my most important tip. If it's not practical, people come away and think, you know, what have I learned? What did I just spend the last half hour or hour doing? It's really important that there's actual takeaways that they can use. So for example, when we do presentations, we don't think about giving people all the problems and the issues that they're going to encounter in their business. It's really important that they have a practical takeaway, that they're going to come away from the presentation and say, oh, okay, now I know how to think about my trademark, or I know what issues I need to encounter in my my presentation or my life, you know, and my business. So as an example, we often talk about trademarks, and we tell people, you know, what makes a really good trademark. It's got to be practical. It's got to be distinctive. It can't be something that's like the Olympic rings or legislated against. So it tells people something practical rather than telling them, if you do a trademark that does this, it's not going to get registered. So they then come away thinking how they're going to brief you in a way that also helps you work for them. Giving them something practical means that they come away also thinking, oh, I've actually gotten something useful. I'm going to go back to that person because they've helped me. So enjoy your presentation, keep it engaging, and don't be nervous. I know that, you know, some people get a bit of stage fright or feel a bit of jitters, but you know, if you're feeling nervous, it's not going to bode well for the presentation. So, you know, it might be a jumble of nerves and a jumble of, you know, different thoughts in your head when you're preparing your presentation, but having PowerPoint is a fantastic tool. You can use it to coordinate and organize your presentation, like I had at the beginning, that introductory slide. It allows you then to be able to focus your thoughts and set it out in a cohesive manner. And again, just, you know, at the end, when you've prepared your presentation, go back and have a look at it. Do you have enough headings? Is it clear? Is it concise? Have you set out the flow at the start of the presentation? So that's what we're saying here. Set out an agenda. Less is more. I tend not to put too much text onto my slides, because I find that if I have a slide full of words, I'm going to sit there reading it rather than listening. I'm sure a lot of you are the same. So, you know, and it also then encourages you to talk a little bit off the cuff and talk to your experiences rather than, you know, just reading. Then you sound a little bit bland. You sound like you're reading. People kind of then say, well, I could have just read that myself. Or, you know, if I get the slides emailed, what's the point in going? And being consistent. So, you know, have your slides looking consistent, have them looking nice and clean. You know, have them consistent with your branding and your identity. And, you know, have your contact details also on your slides so that people can keep in contact with you should they need to follow up anything that they, you know, either didn't understand or want to ask you a bit more about in your presentation. Technology tips and tricks. So we've all seen, like, you know, a few of the videos that have been going around about Lawyer Cat, this guy in particular. So, you know, when you're logging on, you know, check that there are no filters, maybe do a rehearsal, make sure your pets and your doorbell and, you know, everything's off. We got chickens in COVID. I've made sure they're not going to be clucking around, so it sounds like I'm in a zoo. Rehearse your seminar. Make sure that you are comfortable with the content. If you're not going to present well, your audience aren't going to be receptive to it. Stick to time. This is something that we've had feedback from you know, people in the past in terms of the Victorian Law Foundation. They said they've been to some seminars last year where people would have brilliant content and they're trying to cram too much in. They're doing really well. They get to halfway through and they still have an hour or so of content left. So make sure you rehearse your timing, stick to your timing, and that will, you know, have a nice flowing presentation. And if you need to cut out some content, cut it out and let people know, look, you can follow me up down the track. And plan ahead, obviously. Make sure that your phone's, you know, on silent, that no one's gonna, you know, bust into your meeting room or whatnot. So, so coming back to the takeaways, something I found really interesting was that we do a lot of blog posts, and one thing that I have found is that the ones where we actually give people content, like how to actually register a trademark, they're the best kind of performing blog posts that we have. And I say to clients who, you know, I had this lady a few weeks ago who registered a business name instead of a trademark and instead of a company name. And she said to me, so after I'd explained the process, oh, can I do it myself? And I said to her, well, the dentist could show me how to do a filling, but it doesn't mean I'm going to do it. So just because you know how a client knows how to do something doesn't mean they're going to do it or that they are going to do it correctly, or that they're necessarily going to try and do it themselves. So if you're giving them something really practical, and that's kind of the idea of Law Week as well, is to give something practical back to the business community, then it's going to be a much more successful venture for you, for the participants, and for Law Week, because everyone will get a lot more out of it. Enjoy and engage your presentation. Talk, don't read, and keep it practical. So they are my top tips and tricks and my summary. So yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to jump in, or personal experiences as to what you've found in your presentations, feel free to jump in. But otherwise, if you've got any questions or want to chat about any strategies, feel free to get in touch.
Thank you ever so much, Rosalyn, and please feel free to go to the Q&A function if there's something you'd like to put to Rosalyn, because I of course made that crucial error in suggesting we keep questions to the end, and you are one of those people, competent people, who's able to take questions as we go. So my mistake. I should have anticipated that. One thing about, there are a couple of issues that you mentioned in terms of the experience of giving presentations that I would love to tease out. Have we still got you there, Ros? Or have I frozen? I'm not quite sure which is which. Anyway, is Rosalyn there?
Lynn, she appears to have frozen.
Oh, that's a classic, isn't it? Here we have a presentation on presentation, and it's the only one of our better information sessions that's actually frozen. That's really, I think, ironic. The question that I was going to put to Rosalyn, and I'd love your thoughts in the Q&A function if you're keen to participate. Two things really. One, about how to manage nerves, because I think even if you are very comfortable with your material and very clear about what it is you want to get across, there are times and places when it can feel a bit daunting to present in front of people, especially when you can't see them. I think there is, for many of us, there is a fear of standing in front of a crowd. But for others, there's a fear of being aware that you can see the clicker at the bottom and suddenly there's 150 people watching and you're not quite sure where they are and who they are and what they're up to and whether or not they're paying any attention, and that can throw you a bit too. And it's harder to read the room when you're presenting online. Rosalyn, we've got you back.
Oh my God, perfect example of what not to do.
Exactly, we were just talking about exactly that. So as the point that I was making was about, the challenge and the nerves, I think, that can, even when you're pretty comfortable and confident in all your stuff, can get to you. So what do you do? Do you breathe? Do you stand? Do you sip warm water beforehand? Do you have any physical
certainly,
things that you
having
do?
having a couple of deep breaths, having a drink of water on hand. And I think just sort of thinking in the moment, am I talking too fast? Being aware of how you're coming across certainly helps. I've been told I say a lot. That's something I obviously need to work on because I think I still do it a little bit. But I think just being yourself. You're obviously there for a reason. Said it again. You're obviously there for a reason. You've got some information that is valuable to other people that needs to be imparted. And the other people, the participants, are there for a reason. They want to get something out of it. They want to learn from you or to receive the knowledge that you're there to give them and the help and guidance. So being nervous or not coming across well actually isn't beneficial to anyone. So yes. I think, just relax into it. Think of it as best you can as a conversation with another person rather than a presentation for hundreds of people.
Easier said than done. But I take your point that being physically aware can often be a real assistance. I always make sure, for example, that I'm sitting really squarely in the chair, that my feet are on the floor, or in my case, I'm too short, so they're on a footstool, that I feel my heels, and that you therefore have a very solid sensation, if you like, or sense of being quite grounded physically.
Yeah, absolutely. And practice makes perfect. Look, during COVID, we did many, many webinars and presentations to people. I think, people think back to 2 years ago at the start of COVID, there was a lot of fear, a lot of unknown, and having these webinars, whilst I'd actually never done one before COVID, I was the kind of person where, my younger lawyers would say, oh, we really should get on social media. We should do some videos. And I was very nervous. It wasn't my thing at all. I didn't like putting myself out there. I didn't like how I looked or how I sounded on camera. But at the end of the day, it's not about me or how I feel. It's about giving back and helping people. So we did 2, sometimes 3 webinars a week on different topics, and having that practice gives you that confidence as well. So you kind of get over the nerves. We've got a question to say.
Lots of good questions.
Yeah.
So we might come back to Annabelle in a sec, because I think that's a really useful point. There's some about presentation basically, which would be handy to go through.
Yeah.
One about pacing yourself and speaking too quickly. Have you got?
And that's certainly just about practice and maybe doing a lot of webinars and having that awareness of how you sound, how you come across. So And even today, you know, I caught myself a little bit sort of rushing through in the beginning. Take a breath, think about what's coming next, and then go on. That way you don't sound stressed and rushed. And someone said, tips about webinar background, what works well. Look, I have a lovely friend who is in the banner business, and he surprised me with this gift behind me. Keep it clean, keep it professional. The worst Zoom background I had, it was so funny. I had a client and he is a character, and he put on like some pirate filter, and the whole time I'm talking to him about this shareholders agreement, we had these like fake hands spinning a pirate wheel. Obviously you're not going to do that, but things that don't move, things that aren't distracting, things that aren't going to be offensive. You know, even like, let's say if you had a background of a zoo, or, you know, something, someone might be politically opposed to it, or, you know, and then they're going to sit thinking, oh, I can't believe they've got that as a background. So just keep it simple, keep it professional.
I think that's spot on. There's a lot of work done, as you can imagine, about television presentation and how movement, and you see this with politicians, especially at the moment in the middle of an election campaign. We're seeing a lot of them out there doing media conferences all over the place. And those who are more practiced will keep their feet on the ground and their hands down. So it's always problematic if you have somebody who's waving their hands about, especially anywhere near their face, which immediately detracts from what they're saying because you're distracted by what they're doing. And it's the same with heel raising. I don't know if you've noticed this, Rosalyn, but I used to get particularly energized by male politicians in particular, more than women, I think, because women tend to be wearing heels and therefore it's harder to do. But men will rise and fall on the balls of their feet.
Oh, like swaying, yeah.
Yes, and you see that all the time, and it drives me nuts. I keep being distracted by the fact that they're lifting their heels rather than listening to what they say. And our former treasurer, Peter Costello, used to be particularly bad at that, and it always annoyed me. So as you say, keep your backgrounds as simple as possible, no moving parts, because you want people to concentrate on what you're saying and what you're imparting to them rather than, you know, any other, there she goes waving her hands about, any other issues that might distract them from the cause.
Yeah, so, and I like this one because it's a physical background rather than the Zoom ones. Like I find sometimes, you know, if you're watching, yours looks fine, but sometimes if someone's got one of the fake Zoom backgrounds, their hair kind of cuts in and out, or their face, like the edges go a bit funny. So I try and stay away from those. Someone's asked about looking at the camera. That is an art. You need to get used to like focusing on that dot of the camera and looking at the person in your peripheral vision or the rest of the screen in your periphery. It is a little bit tricky to do. But again, you know, just practice it and you'll get used to it. Record yourself. So if you record yourself and you are looking down the whole time, you'll see what it looks like and it'll remind you to look up at the camera.
And once again, as you say, that's about comfort with your material, because you will also see, and I do it too, you know, I'll flick to one screen over here to read a bit of text and then come back to camera. And that can be a bit off-putting. But if you know your content well enough and you are speaking to dot points as opposed to reading spiels, then you're much more comfortable looking at the camera.
Absolutely. And look, when I started and I felt like I needed some notes or a bit of a safety net there, I would do a split screen and I'd put my notes on one half of the screen and the Zoom on the other, and still try and focus on the camera, but you've got your notes there. So, you know, it looks a bit squished and messy when you're looking at it, but no one else can see what you're actually looking at. Whereas if you put, you know, if I've got my notes down on my desk, I'm looking, but if I'm looking just kind of slightly off to the side. So in the beginning, that's, you know, how I'd manage that until I got my confidence up to be able to just speak to what I needed to talk about.
We go back to Annabelle's question, because I think it's a really useful one about fact sheets or resources, you know, as she puts it, the equivalent to a handout for participants. Do you use links?
I don't really, and maybe that's more of a technology thing with me, that I'm not necessarily comfortable with putting links in the presentation, or embedding videos and that kind of clever stuff. Certainly, if you're comfortable with it, by all means do it. I think putting links into your presentation is not great, because then it's going to detract from what people are focusing on. Again, you want them focused and listening to you. If you want to click on a link and show them something, you could do that, or just do snapshots, pre-prepare it into your presentation. But I wouldn't be sort of encouraging people to go up and look at other links. They can do that in their own time afterwards.
I suppose if you were sending the slides out, you could put some resources at the bottom that people would then sort of pursue in their own time. That might be an upside. So I think we've talked about backgrounds. I'm just quickly looking at the other. Taking questions throughout the talk. See, Merritt's been any tips for limiting question and comment time? I think there are two debates here, one about having enough time for questions, and one maybe where comments tend to run on and end up being paragraphs long rather than a question that can be easily addressed.
Yeah, absolutely, Lynn. And I think one of the benefits of Zoom is that you don't have to necessarily raise the question. So if there's a question there and you can see it's either not quite on topic or too long, you could either just ignore it and deal with it at the end, or you could say, Sam Smith, I can see you've asked a question. I'll come to that down the track, or let's discuss that one offline. Or you could answer it in your own way. If someone's asked some long rambling question, you just paraphrase it and give them an answer that you think is appropriate at the time.
But how do you find doing that? Because it is hard to sort of scroll through. If somebody's written you an essay in the Q&A, you're trying to discern what the question is and to do it justice whilst presenting at the same time. How do you manage that?
Yep. So in the beginning of COVID, when I was getting used to the process, I would have an assistant or a helper, and they would filter the questions and they would write a response for me in the chat that was separate. So in the question and answer, everyone can see what's being answered. So they would, write something to me and I would respond. But as you get more confident, you can kind of, skim read it. I can see, someone's written, a paragraph about the length of a seminar, and, I don't need to read the whole thing out, but I can see it's there, and I'll address that now. So the length of the seminar, I think, it's a natural response or reflex to book an hour-long webinar. They don't have to be an hour long. This one's a punchy, half an hour. If you think your content is suited to a half an hour or even 45 minutes, just book that, because you can always adapt it. But if it's too long and you're padding it out for the sake of it, people are going to be put off. The other thing is, maybe that's also why, so many people have attended, a nice punchy half an hour seminar on how to present. If it was an hour long, people might have struggled to find the time to fit it in their busy day.
Absolutely. I think it's all about matching the content to the duration. And as you say, we have this sort of default position that we must fill an hour. Or at least that should be the commitment, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the case. And I've also always been very pleased, if people get to the end of their stuff and the questions have been dealt with, you can finish early. You don't need to sort of hold on and regard yourselves as having maybe, not fulfilled the brief. If you pull up stumps, 10 minutes early, all good. Everyone gets 10 minutes back.
That's right, exactly. And so, the last question someone's asked is about a hybrid session. I don't think I've done one where it's been a mix of webinar and physical, but my tip would just be to, make sure the camera is in a position as though the person were there physically, as though the camera was a person present in the audience, close enough so that it's not going to detract from the fact that, you don't want to watch a webinar and the person's, a tiny dot on the screen a million miles away. You want it to be as engaging as though it's a webinar. And then hopefully for the people in the room, it's not such an issue having the camera sitting there.
I think this will be our future, that we will see more and more hybrid presentations and conversations, and the technology is getting a whole lot better very quickly, thankfully, because it's been pretty clunky. So I'm pleased to say that it's improving rapidly. But as you say, I think it's all about, how you are framed, and therefore your level of engagement, which goes back to your very first point about engaging with your audience. And if you're too far away and they can't see you properly and perhaps can't hear you properly, then that's a fundamental erosion of the point of the exercise. But let me ask you finally, what's the best webinar you've ever seen? And did you think, or what did you take away from that? Can you think of something that that really was, you came away thinking that was really well done?
I'll actually go the opposite way and say the worst seminar I've ever been to was when I was in-house and I went to a law firm, and it was on privacy, and the whole exercise was a marketing experience for the firm, and it scared you into thinking all the things that you're going to do wrong and all the ways the company can get sued, and it didn't give me anything practical. I came away terrified, and that has always stuck in my mind as my benchmark of, don't just scare people into thinking, oh my God, I need to go and brief a lawyer because I'm going to get sued. Give them something practical that will actually help them.
And mine would be, having watched a lot of webinars over the last few years, don't do too much. And you mentioned this at the top as well. Less is more. And as you mentioned, we've certainly had experience where people have had terrific content to share, but have had to race through the last 20 minutes because they've wedged in way too much. I think we tend to underestimate how long it takes to talk, and we get a bit nervous about not having enough. So we tend to pack in a whole lot more content than perhaps we really need, and to let it breathe. And if you are just talking rather than reading off slides, then it can take you a little bit longer, because there are other aspects of that point that might have come to you, that might have been mentioned in the news this morning or whatever, that are going to make it relevant for your audience. So
absolutely,
I think from my experience anyway, cut some of your content out, be really, really ruthless about what it is you're trying to communicate, and hold to that, and don't over pad.
Absolutely. And you can always go back in. You can say, oh, we've got a few extra minutes. Let me also tell you about X, Y, Z.
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely correct. Rosalyn, it has been a great pleasure. And in the interest of a short, punchy, effective, and very useful presentation, we will call it there. And just remind everybody that we will be sending you a recording of today's conversation, and the questions as well, and also the slides. So thank you ever so much for your time, and have a fun time in this year's Law Week, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Will do. You too. Have a great morning.
Bye, everyone.